Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
The U.S. and Ukraine signed an agreement granting the U.S. access to Ukraine's valuable mineral resources. To discuss this deal and what it means going forward, Professor Alexander Motyl, Ukraine and Russia expert at Rutgers University, joins us. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, ladies.
So, Alex, what do we know about the terms of this deal?
Well, it's about 9 or 10 pages. That's the initial memorandum. And we know that it's significantly more equitable than the one that had preceded it. This is now the fourth draft. The first one was basically exploitative. The second one was much fairer, at least as far as Ukraine was concerned. The third was exploitative again. And then the Ukrainians basically bargained hard, and now they've come up with a deal that is equitable for both sides. In terms of practicalities, developing these mineral resources takes something like 10 to 15 years. So there's not going to be any immediate consequences. So the deal is important because of its symbolism. It suggests that the United States is committed to some kind of long-term Ukrainian existence, at least for 15 years, which given Trump's record is quite a lot. It suggests that they're going to be working together as opposed to having one side have the determining voice. The details will come in later memoranda, but the overall deal seems to be a step forward in terms of the American recognition of Ukraine as an equitable partner. So that's good. And it's a signal to Russia, I think, that the United States is serious about helping Ukraine. Again, given Trump's mercurial nature and the fact that he flip-flops on a daily basis, we won't know for sure whether the deal will mean what it's supposed to mean for a few weeks or months. But nevertheless, it's far better than the alternative, which was a colonial exploitative deal that was completely unfair.
So it's some kind of investment fund, is that right?
It's an investment fund jointly owned by the Ukrainians and the Americans. Both sides would have equal say. They're supposed to divide the profits in some equitable manner. A certain amount is supposed to go to the United States for initial investments. Investment will be encouraged. Ukraine's ability to join the European Union isn't affected by the deal, which is very important because the earlier draft basically would have excluded that option. There is an implied security concern, not a guarantee, but a security concern within the deal as well, which is, again, symbolically, it's great. Practically, we'll see what it means in 15 years. But for the time being, it's a good step forward.
Well, after the nightmare in the White House with Trump and how he exploited Zelensky, something happened in between, obviously, because now he criticized Putin for striking Ukraine again. Oh, interesting. Zelensky and Trump in Rome during the Pope's funeral. I thought that was quite interesting. So does this mean Zelensky is back in Trump's good graces?
Well, it's hard to say again. It's clearly, the Trump's current attitude towards Zelensky is obviously preferable to the attitude he expressed in the Oval Office back in February. That was just insulting, distasteful. Every possible negative characterization applies to Trump's behavior. So the fact that the two men huddled in that famous shot in the Vatican, seemingly one-to-one with this tete-a-tete, that alone is an encouraging image. Unfortunately, with Trump, you never know. He's called Zelensky a dictator at least twice.
And that he started the war.
He started the war. He said that twice as well. And then in the interim, they kind of kissed and made up. And then he's called him a traitor. So for all I know, he's going to call him a traitor tomorrow again.
Exactly.
Likewise, if you look closely at what Trump said about Putin's attack on civilians in Ukraine, it was a very mild criticism. So he says, Vladimir, stop. If you're going to be critical, you would say, hey, you, stop, right? But when you use the first name, that's basically another way of saying, you're still my pal, but I do think you should stop. And then he went on to say the firing of the missiles was untimely and, well, something to that effect. And many Ukrainians said, oh, so that implies that at other times it was timely. you know, I mean, it was at best a very weak criticism. But that said, it was a criticism nonetheless, and we should be thankful for the small gifts that we get. Whether he'll continue in this manner, well, we'll see. Just yesterday, he gave an interview, I think it was NBC, where
Oh,
he was asked
meet the
about
press?
where he was
Oh,
asked about the 3-day ceasefire proposed by Putin. And he said, well, it's actually a lot. Well, it's not a lot. It's nothing. So again, that seems to suggest that he's softer on Putin than he should be. But again, you never know, right? So far, within the last 2 weeks, the tendency, the trend on Trump's part has been in the right direction. And as I said, we should be grateful for the small
Yeah.
blessings.
Yeah, for the small things. So okay, so the Russians are still hammering at Ukraine, still attacking. And Ukraine needs to bolster its army. So there's been reporting that Ukraine is now drafting men under the age of 25, even lowering medical requirements or standards, such as allowing people who had HIV and maybe tuberculosis to serve. So, to your knowledge, is this happening?
What I've read is that they have been encouraging younger men to join. And it's basically a kind of a propaganda advertising campaign. And I'm sure somewhere along the way, standards have been reduced so as to get the requisite number of people into the army. So there is a problem. I mean, again, the Ukrainians are quite upfront on this. It's not just Western journalists and policymakers who've noticed. There is a problem. Is it a significant problem? At this point, probably not. Because if you look at the battlefield performance of the Ukrainian army, they've actually pretty much stopped Russian advances. 3, 4 months ago, the Russians were gaining something like 100 or 200 square kilometers per month. Now it's down to about 20 or 30. So it's a significant drop. They haven't stopped attacking. It's just that they've obviously stopped advancing. And that suggests that the Ukrainian army is performing well. It may not be capable of pushing the Russians back, although again, it's too soon to say whether that's possible. But at this point, the mere fact that they can stop Russia from advancing further can be considered a minor victory. So we'll see how the future develops, but at this point, it looks like the Ukrainians are in a pretty good position on the battlefield. One of the things that has led to these minor successes is the fact that the vast majority of the fighting is now being done by drones on the battlefield. I mean, in the early years of the war, it was artillery, which is still
yeah.
important, but it's no longer quite as important as drones. And the Ukrainians are producing something like 200,000 drones a month, and they expect to produce 2.5 million by the end of the year.
Wow.
And a drone costs several $1,000s, 4 or 5,000. So it's significantly cheaper than missiles and so on. And basically, the entire country is behind this project of creating drones in garages and underground factories. So if this continues, and it
Hmm.
will, it'll have a kind of evening out effect. Will it enable the Ukrainians to push the Russians back? Who knows? But for the time being, it certainly serves the purpose of halting their advance.
Is the United States helping finance these drones?
No, well, the Ukrainians have committed something like a quarter or a third of their budget to defense. So it's Ukrainian money. And again, mind you, a drone costs 4,000, 5,000. And of course, if you multiply that by 2.5 million, you're talking about serious money. But it's largely Ukrainian funds that are going towards this. The EU is helping. The United States, as far as I know, has not provided significant assistance. However, what is important, and again, this is all within the last few days,
Yeah.
the White House officials as well as Pentagon officials have said that they're approving something like $300 million of military assistance to Ukraine to repair and refurbish F-16 planes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also talk just yesterday and the day before that Israel will be supplying Ukraine with a Patriot missile system. It's a defensive missile system. And another one should be coming from either Germany or Greece. Again, 350 or 300 million is a drop in the bucket when you consider that Ukraine needs 30, 40 billion, but it's a step in the right direction. And 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, it looked like Trump was going to nix any kind of assistance whatsoever.
Yes.
So the mere fact that they've crossed this particular Rubicon, so to speak, is a potentially good sign of the administration's intentions.
So, yeah. So, speaking of the drones, now Ukraine recently attacked Moscow with some drones in advance of this big parade that they're having in Moscow. Is this going to affect these peace negotiations one way or the other?
Well, the drone attacks on Moscow, I mean, the Ukrainians aren't going to be sending drones on Red Square where foreign diplomats will be assembled and, thousands of people. That would be crazy as well as inhuman. So they're targeting places on the outskirts just to send a message that if we wanted to, we could. And in the meantime, you should be a little terrified of our potential to be able to inflict some damage on you. Will this affect the peace negotiations, which are pretty much moribund at this point in time? My own sense is that the answer is pretty much no. I mean, there are two key factors behind the key peace negotiations, or rather behind the lack of movement in the peace negotiations. One concerns Trump and his team, especially Steve Witkoff, whom I call Witless Steve Witkoff. Again, they have no idea what they're doing. These guys this is amateur hour.
Yes.
Witkoff goes off, meets Putin. Putin tells him that when Trump was almost assassinated, he said a prayer for him in his church, and Witkoff believes him. I mean, it's as if Hitler told someone, "Oh yes, I went to a synagogue to pray." I mean, for Christ's sakes, I mean, you really need to be totally naive to believe something like that.
Well, he believes what Trump tells him, so it's the
So
same.
why not? I mean, this is true. I mean,
Exactly.
you have a point. But in any case, so on the one hand, the Americans really don't know what they're up against. They don't know what Russia's doing. They don't understand Russia. They don't understand Ukraine. They don't understand why the war broke out. I mean, they just don't know. It's quite simple. That's not to say everybody doesn't know, but certainly the key players, Witkoff and Trump, are ignorant when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. And how can you expect them to come up with some solution? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is Putin. Putin has insisted throughout that his minimal demand is the complete and total annexation of the entire provinces, the 4 provinces that Russia formally, officially annexed at the end of 2022. These provinces are currently about half occupied by or half controlled by Ukrainian forces. So technically, from his point of view, Ukraine is occupying Russian territory and not the reverse. He can't agree to anything short of that. That would make him look stupid and weak. And he can't look stupid and weak. And he needs to justify the fact that Russia is close to losing a million dead and wounded. And to say that he simply captured a bunch of territory but fell short of these provinces is essentially to admit that he's wasted enormous human and economic resources. That would undermine his legitimacy, that would undermine his authority. So Putin is he's in no hurry to make any kind of concessions. And of course, Trump and Witkoff think that he can be persuaded to do this, and he can't, he won't. It's simply not in his genes on the one hand, and secondly, I mean, it's his own political survival that's on the line.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Zelensky, in this regard,
Yeah.
he's been a masterful diplomat. He's basically said yes, sir, to everything that Trump has suggested. You want a ceasefire? Absolutely, we want a ceasefire. 3 days? No way. How about 30 days? How about forever? The U.S. is doing everything right. Now, of course, I think Zelensky knows better, and he understands that the U.S. is not doing everything right, but he understands that he's got to agree. And this puts Putin into a bind because Putin has thus far rejected this peace proposal that was developed by Witkoff and Trump for obvious reasons. And now that makes him look like the obstreperous bad guy. And suddenly Zelensky looks like this skillful diplomat who's been manipulating Trump and Putin. Now we'll see whether that continues, but so far so good.
Does this include Crimea? We hear so much about that, and I don't believe that Zelensky would say yes to Trump. And in my heart, I believe that Trump has asked him to do that.
Well, the Crimea
Well,
business
it's
is,
what Putin wants, right? That's one of his demands.
it's one of his demands, and some analysts have argued that Putin should have agreed to the peace deal suggested by Witkoff because he gets Crimea,
Oh,
de jure. He gets the other eastern territories would be recognized as de facto occupied, which isn't too bad. But of course, again, that just misses the point that he wouldn't be getting the four provinces in their entirety, only those that are currently occupied by the Russian forces. Zelensky can't agree to the giving up Crimea, partly because it would violate the Ukrainian constitution, which is of some importance, partly because it would violate international law. Now, Trump, this is where it gets a little subtle, has told Zelensky, I'm not asking you to recognize Crimea. We would recognize Crimea's de jure annexation by Russia. It wouldn't mean that you would need to do so. And that seems like a clever way of splitting the difference at first glance. But the problem is, of course, that if the United States recognizes Crimea, and it is a superpower that has enormous influence over the globe, that would soon lead to other countries recognizing Crimea. And before you know it,
That's
it
right.
would be recognized as part of Russia. And of course, Zelensky can't agree to that. He can agree to Russia being temporarily the occupying power. He can, and that basically he's already agreed to that. I mean, he's already said that we would be willing to recognize that Russia is in control of these territories without recognizing that this is legitimate control. Fair enough. But that's not what Putin wants, and that doesn't seem to be quite what Trump is
Uh-huh.
suggesting.
Now, you mentioned as part of this deal, Ukraine could be a member of the European Union, but what about NATO?
Well, part of the deal would be that Ukraine would promise not to become a member of NATO. Well, again, aside from the fact that the deal is unacceptable for Ukraine for all sorts of other reasons, that's one of the reasons that is less significant, partly because, promises were made to be broken. And imagine, for the sake of argument, that there is in fact a peace and it breaks out and Russia and Ukraine become the best of friends. On the one hand, that would make membership in NATO irrelevant. And if they remain enemies, Ukraine can always say, well, sorry, we lied. End of story. So, I
Right?
mean, countries do this all the time.
They could.
The other point is, as I think I've said on this program before, being a member of NATO simply doesn't guarantee your security because Article 5, which ostensibly means that countries are obligated to intervene on behalf of countries that are attacked by outside countries. It says nothing about the form in which they need to respond. So it doesn't have to be military. It could be political, diplomatic, cultural, social, humanitarian, and so on. So the bottom line is, as people are increasingly coming to understand, and this is basically the Ukrainian position, yes, membership in NATO would be great because it would mean that Ukraine is moving toward the West. It would be part of a Western institution. It would improve its military and so on. So that's good. But in terms of security, basically, the only country that can secure Ukraine against Russia is Ukraine. So the bottom line
Yeah.
is it needs to have the wherewithal, military hardware, armed forces, Air Force, Navy, blah, blah, to be in the position where they could deter any possible Russian attack, because no one's going to come and defend Ukraine. Not the Americans, not the Poles, not the British, not the French, not the Germans. So bottom line is this, the only security guarantee is the security guarantee that the Ukrainians can give themselves. And that's good because on the one hand, the Ukrainians are building up their military capacity. We already talked about the drones. But at the same time, it means that all Europe and the US need do is simply provide Ukraine with the hardware. They don't have to, I mean, if they send in 10 or 20,000 troops to, maintain air bases, that's all very nice and good, but it won't make a significant difference.
Do they have the manpower to do that now? Ukraine?
Well, at this point, yeah, they've got something like 700,000 troops, if I'm not mistaken, that are currently battle ready. That's a significant amount.
Yeah.
And they've got the drones. They've been promised assistance on the artillery front. They're getting some F-16s, which is important. Again, they remember to deter Russia, they don't need to beat the pants off Russia. They just need to make any possible Russian aggression too painful for the Russians to bear. And the Ukrainians have already done that. When you consider that the Russians have lost 1 million men or close to losing 1 million men and women, their economy is in tatters, inflation is rising and all of that. When you consider all of that, the Ukrainians have essentially shown that they can impose enormous costs on the Russians. The Russians claim to be the second most powerful army in the world, and the Ukrainians have shown that they're not. And again, who would have thunk it? Back in 2022, it looked like it would be a cakewalk for the Russians, but the Ukrainians have obviously shown that A, they have the resilience and the strength, but B, they've also shown how miserable the Russian armed forces actually are. This is remarkable. The Russians are in such deep problems. They have such deep problems with logistics that they're using donkeys in order to move supplies on the front. Again, I don't mean to say every part of the front is using donkeys, but the mere fact that they are resorting to donkeys, I mean, this is World War One.
That's pretty desperate.
It is
pretty desperate. Yeah.
And Putin his ego won't let him give in.
He can't give in. He can't give in. And the same applies to Trump.
Yes.
Trump has been saying he's going to withdraw, he's going to leave it alone. Well, when he said back in 2024 that he's going to fix this in 24 hours,
yeah,
that was effectively a way of stating that he now owns the war. Now, the Republicans are saying, no, it's Biden's war. Well, I'm sorry, it was Biden's war until Trump said, I'm going to fix it. Now it's his war. And as we all know, he's got a big ego as well. And if he cuts and runs, that's just going to look at best foolish, at worst cowardly.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
He's in a bit of a bind himself.
Exactly. Like anything like that would make Trump look weak.
Look weak and basically
stupid. Totally.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I know we spoke a bit earlier about security guarantees for Ukraine. under this deal. Is it true that this deal, the minerals deal, did not provide any sort of security guarantees to Ukraine from the U.S.?
It didn't provide, but there's talk of Ukrainian security. There's an implication that the United States would resume military assistance if and when Russia misbehaves. So it's kind of fuzzy, squishy language, but at least, again, on the plus side, at least it mentions Ukrainian security concerns, which the initial drafts did not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's at least a sign that the United States seems to recognize that this is an important issue. Whether the United States will then proceed to do anything about it is a different story. Secretary of the Treasury Besant said the mere fact that we sign this deal, which may produce, concrete mining results in about 10 or 15 years, obviously implies that we expect Ukraine to exist as a sovereign state for 10, 15 years. And he's right. I mean, it would be nice if the United States said that explicitly, and it would be even nicer if it said that it would support this sovereignty explicitly. But as I said, considering where we were back in February when it looked like the end of the world for Ukraine and Zelensky, these are all steps in the right direction. I mean, they still fall short of where Ukraine would like to be. But again, considering that there was that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office, this is all to the good.
Listening to everything you say about Putin and that he's basically weak, what about security for this country? Do you think that Putin is going to take advantage of that we have these incompetent people in the White House?
Well, I think someone will take advantage of that. I'm not sure Putin will. I don't know if he quite has the capacity at this point with the military losses. The Russians are promoting a variety of subversive and terrorist acts in Europe. So in Poland, Germany, Norway, and other places, there have been these mysterious explosions, fires. I mean, it was just recently the Poles captured some individual who was planning to attack Polish buildings with bombs. And that clearly has the signature of the secret police, the Russian secret police on it. And he's doing that to sow fear, to create disunity, to promote the right, to create the impression that the liberals and the Democrats are incapable of defending the country. The US is a little too far away. I mean, again, it's possible, but I would imagine that hackers and people like that who don't have to be present in the country will continue to do what they've been doing for the last 5, 10 years. But in terms of direct involvement, I'm not sure. That said, I think the greater danger for the United States is that the FBI and the CIA, which have their own checkered histories, but they have ultimately the task of protecting the United States from internal and external enemies, are being decimated.
Yes.
Thousands of people have been let go. There's a structural reorganization. The people working for these two institutions appear to be demoralized. And it seems to me that these are simply conditions that are ripe for subversion and possibly terrorist action by outside groups. Whether these are terrorists, and there are many who dislike the United States, whether it's China or other such countries, now would be the time to take advantage of this disorganization and this confusion, to infiltrate your people into the country and to wreak havoc. I mean, it's almost an invitation for that to happen. And you got to figure someone is planning to do just that.
Makes perfect sense. So, Alex, thank you. As usual, thank you so much for your incisive analysis of the current situation, just helping us clarify what's going on in this ever-changing and volatile situation.
As always, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.